So as of about 5 minutes ago, there has been a rollout of the hotfix that was promised yesterday. Now, with these hotfixes, usually they just kind of come out into the game and you don't have to like restart or like wait for an update or whatever. It's just going to roll out slowly. In some cases, there's like massive bugs that require you to restart, but it's supposed to be live inside the game for everyone within the next hour. On top of that, they've actually given us numbers associated with the changes that they're making. Before, they just said, hey, it's going to be easier in the early stages. We're going to give you more glyph XP and some other things associated with this hotfix. And now we actually have some numbers. So I want to start off with how they've restructured the early tiers. Before, they basically said by tier 10, it should be the same difficulty as the current tier 10. So that means that tier 1 through 9 should be easier. And now they actually give us some comparisons. So the tier 1 of Abattoir of Zir now is roughly equivalent to a tier 90 Nightmare Dungeon. Before, that tier 1 would have been about a 104, as they've claimed. By tier 5 in the Abattoir of Zir, that's like a Nightmare Dungeon tier 100. And then by tier 10, it looks like that's going to be equivalent to about a tier 10. So what that means is around tier 6 or so, that is the same difficulty as the previous tier 1. Again, this is like a rough estimation, but then they also reduced incoming damage by 20% throughout all tiers. Now, I'm not sure if they say, hey, a tier 1 is equivalent to a Nightmare tier 90, and then you get a 20% damage reduction on top of that, or if it's, hey, with the damage reduction that we're giving you, tier 1 is now a tier 90. I guess we'll have to test it out and see, but let's say, again, just for the sake of estimation here, around a tier 6 or 7 is roughly the live difficulty tier 1 that we had previously. I guess no longer live, but the previous tier 1s. What that means is Paragon Glyph experience can be relatively easily calculated based on that change. Because previously, tier 1 was the optimal way to farm Glyph XP within the Abattoir of Zir, because the later stages didn't offer you enough, right? By tier 10, you were getting 4k Glyph XP, and tier 10 would take 10 minutes, right? It would be way longer than a tier 1, which if you are really min-max and you had a good build, you could do within like 2 to 4 to 5 minutes. So people were farming tier 1s, and in this case now, you'll probably be farming somewhere around tier 6s or 7s. And based on some estimations that a lot of people made, I think Rax did a great video on this, it's roughly around 6.5 million glyph XP to max out your glyph. Again, I'm not sure if all the numbers have actually been found in the game. I just know that this was like a rough estimation. And therefore, it took about 300 plus hours to max out this glyph. With the recent changes, let's assume you're farming a tier 6, which means you're probably getting around 3k glyph XP per run. That's 3 times as fast. Which means that, well, you roughly cut the time that you take to farm that glyph all the way up by 1/3. Or you take 1/3 the amount of time that you previously would have run, which is a massive buff. Okay, that's a huge buff, and I do think that's a good thing. And you could see at the later stages, let's say you're running tier 25s. Let's say you're able to do tier 25s. Perhaps with the damage reduction now, we actually can get closer to tier 25s. Well, you're getting 117,000 glyph XP per run. And, well, I'll do the math reverse here. I was actually doing the math myself, but let's say you're getting 117,000 glyph XP, right? Well, that means that every 10 minutes, let's say you're doing it in 10 minutes because that's the limit, and tier 25s are very, very hard. So that means you're doing this every 10 minutes, which means 6 per hour. So you're doing 702,000 glyph XP per hour. And that also means if we have 6.5 million here, again, rough estimate, and I said what, 702,000? That means that it's roughly going to take you 9.25 hours to max out your Abattoir of Zir glyph, which means that actually, instead of taking like a ton of time, the glyph XP that you get from raising up your tiers actually will translate to less time spent farming because of the way it scales, which means that it gives you a lot more viability to push the tiers and actually get some reward out of it, which is actually a really good thing. Because a lot of people felt that pushing those later tiers meant literally nothing. And it was true. It literally meant nothing because you were getting less glyph XP. You're getting the same amount of loot. It all was for achievement's sake. So people were just farming tier 1s, which felt pretty bad. But now it looks like farming those higher tiers are actually going to be worth it for people who could actually do it within reasonable amounts of time. Again, this is the maximum time you could spend in an Abattoir of Zir. So even if you were spending 10 minutes per run, it's still going to take you like 1/30th the amount of time previously to max out your glyph. This was like a massive buff in terms of XP, right? We go from 18k to 117k, right? That is huge. Just to give you all an kind of an idea, that is 6.6 times the amount of XP we were previously getting for a tier 25. So that's huge. And then lastly, they also made it so Bloodseekers can no longer spawn with the Vampiric or Suppressor affixes. This is really important as well because Vampiric affixes were basically making your damage like null. And then Suppressor affixes were also reducing your damage significantly depending on your build, of course. This also affects Bloodseekers everywhere, so that could be nice for a lot more casual players. The question is all of this really doing anything? If we pop over to my video I did yesterday, a lot of you commented on kind of what was the problems with the Abattoir of Zir. And I think this comment here perfectly kind of represented what I was talking about yesterday, which was one of the biggest problems with the Abattoir of Zir is that it's not for casual players. And as they say, they can hope to complete a 90 tier Nightmare Dungeon. They're not even at 90 Nightmare Dungeon. And that's very typical, right? This is not something that's uncommon. The vast majority of people are barely into Nightmare Tier 4, or maybe a little bit into Nightmare Tier 4. Those are the casual players. And so these people that are just kind of playing throughout the game are hoping for this update, and it's relegated to the top 1% of the 1%. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be the worst thing ever. I think getting content for those endgame players is a good thing, and I think they should do it. The problem is that that's like really the only thing in terms of new content that we've gotten, and all the people that are casually playing haven't really gotten anything to kind of pique their interest, and I think that's one of the biggest issues. I've also heard some people complaining about the complaining, which is funny, saying that like, oh, people wanted it harder, you got something hard, and now they want it nerfed to make it easy. I think the bigger issue with this isn't that it was hard. It was that it was time consuming and boring and artificially inflated, right? So when we want difficulty, we want some sort of interesting challenge. I think one of the best examples of an interesting challenge in this game is an Uber Lilith boss. There are some one-shot mechanics in that, but there are some builds that, maybe can avoid that to some degree. But that is like something that you come in, you challenge for the purpose of trying to accomplish it. You don't necessarily farm it typically. And the Uber Lilith is extremely unique mechanics where you have to kind of memorize play patterns or attack patterns and kind of play around those strategies, learn the mechanics, and eventually the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. And these kind of Abattoir of Zirs, it's more of like a grind fest and a time race where if you don't have the DPS, then you can't beat it. And then even if you do have the DPS, but you don't have the tankiness because you don't have the DPS to go farm through it, therefore you can't even reach the end, so you needed more DPS, but then by getting more DPS, you get less tankiness, and then you get one shot, and ends up making the whole experience just like not difficult, just time consuming. So there's a big difference between like making solid content with good boss mechanics and like actual interesting gameplay and kind of just throwing something out there because people want something new. And I think this kind of falls under the latter, which is we just basically got glorified greater rifts. That being said, we do have some changes, and I do think they are certainly on the positive side of things, vastly improving the game mode, especially in the time-consuming portion. So I'm excited to see kind of how this impacts going forward. But I do think Blizzard is doing some good changes. There was another funny comment that I want to mention before I end this video, which was someone commented like, how many times do we have to have, oh, this is a step in the right direction before like we finally get like a playable game? And that is a reasonable criticism, right? Like, how many times do we have to say like close but not quite there until we actually get to a point where we are having fun? And I think that's where like a lot of people are at right now. So a lot of people are trying out PoE for that reason. And I mean, it is what it is, I hope that we get some good changes like this going forward and some things kind of addressed. But I'm happy that this has changed, and I'm looking forward to, honestly, season 3 more so than anything. I just kind of want this season to move on. We also have a Christmas event coming soon. I believe they did a little bit of an announcement about that previously. I think Adam posted something about that, but that's going to be coming on December 12th. Maybe it was like, here it is. The Diablo official Twitter posted the Abattoir of Zir here. So, or the Midwinter Blight. So if you're interested in that holiday event, it will be coming December 12th. So stay on the lookout for that, and also be doing a video for that when it comes out, probably on my my new character. And thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know what you think with the actual changes inside the game, and I'll see you all for the next one.